Hey designers, welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to take a step towards sort of drawing from life in our studio by doing some value studies. Now, everything we've been up to so far in our drawings has been about the edge, the contour edge. But if you ever think about, how you might draw something in space, it's almost never defined by its edge necessarily in our perceived space. The edge is always kind of an illusion. If we're trying to draw something as it exists, it's much more important to sort of make studies of the lighting. And so it's really not a bad idea if you're working in your studio practicing this, that you have sort of a small object and a light so that you can actually pay really close attention to how light falls on that. In this folded object, for example, you can see how the different stair steps or different stages of grays as I go from highlight to shadow. It's important to observe those changes in the world around you, not merely kind of come up with them. Now that said, we're going to use a drawing exercise today to sort of think through how light falls on objects so that when we do our observational drawings, you're a little bit more sensitive to what's going on. Like, for example, we'll start with something simple like a box because we'll pay attention to how light falls over an edge. We'll pay attention to how light falls over a rolled surface. We're also going to pay attention to a couple of very specific areas: highlight, midtone, and shadow. Now, that's a bit of an oversimplification. Even in our sort of gradations that we did, we had a 5-step gradation. But thinking kind of in those terms isn't bad. In this case, we'll probably add a 4th. We'll do highlight, midtone, shadow, and then a deep shadow or a shadow core. This is oftentimes where an object sort of sits on a surface. It casts a very dark shadow. So let's go through a drawing exercise together, and then we'll work on some drawings from life. The materials I'm going to work with today are pretty simple. We're going to kind of open up our vine charcoal sticks. You only need one of them. The vine charcoal sticks are exactly what they sound like. It's a willow charcoal stick that's been charcoalized or sort of combusted, burned up, and the only thing that's left is the black charcoal. It's kind of messy, so expect to get it all over your hands. Don't worry, it washes out. You may also find that having your eraser handy is not a bad idea. We have 2 different kinds of erasers for working with charcoal. Just your brake eraser for today is good enough. And then you may find that if you want to do any blending, this rag I have in your kit is not a bad way to sort of blend some of the charcoal into the page. So let's start by very carefully holding your vine charcoal stick so that you don't break it, and lay out our box. Precision here is not super important because, again, I'm not really interested in these edges, maintaining these edges. We're going to be working with value quite a bit. So now that I've got this box laid out, let's very lightly, because we're going to build value gradually, render in the ground. The ground, in this case, is not merely what the box is sitting on, but also the background. The ground is just sort of my mid-tone gray. The whiteness of this paper essentially becomes our highlight, right? So anything that's not supposed to be brilliantly bright highlight, I need to knock it down. This is also referred to in traditional drawing as toning the ground. I'm just kind of laying a value in. Now, you might see a lot of artists reach in with a thumb and then just kind of smudge this around. I'm going to avoid bringing any oil or grit on my fingers to the page. If you want to do some blending, because you don't like the way the charcoal stick leaves a sort of drawn mark on the page, use the rag that's in your kit and small spiraling blend marks will sort of bring the ground down to a mid-tone gray. This is also how we're going to maintain our edges, by either blending or coming back in with an eraser then to sort of remove any charcoal that crept over onto our form. And I'm going to give that box its shadow. The light source for this little drawing exercise, we can imagine sort of being up here coming down at an angle on top of the box. So the top of the box is going to be our highlight, this face of the box is going to be our midtone, and this face will be in shadow because it's over the edge. It has broken over this edge of the box. Because of that, this side of the box is also going to be in shadow, and this side of the box will be not in deep dark shadow, but will be sort of in a mid-tone. I'm going to lay in those values and then come back in with the rag and start to blend. So I already have the sort of basic ideas in place now, but I'm just not quite there with my values. I'm not going to work into the top anymore. I'm just going to leave that white paper, but I need to come back in and describe where my box touches the ground. I keep on losing that edge because of the blending. That's okay. And redefining that shadow, which is going to be the darkest area of the drawing, and then darken this side of the box again. Just like in our value gradations sort of exercises, we're building layers of value slowly. I'm not trying to just kind of lay it down once and be done. So for the purposes of this drawing, pay attention to a couple of really specific things. First of all, our three basic tones are present. Our highlight is the tone of the paper, the whitest white we'll have. Our midtone is sort of still being illuminated by our light source, but it's not in direct light. And then our shadow. Our shadow is being blocked, or it's not, you don't have access to the light source. And all we can do really is sort of push and pull those values by either adding charcoal or removing charcoal. If you can kind of sort of think of it as dirtying the page or cleaning the page, it sort of reduces some of the mystery of how this happens. And what also happens around an edge, right? When the light hits a sharp folded edge, it behaves differently than when it hits a rounded edge. This edge here sort of has the look and feel of a rounded edge because I haven't established the verticals. These edges feel a little bit more folded because the light breaks really hard around them. Let's try one more drawing. We'll work with a sphere form. We'll use our exact same light source, sort of up and to the right. The boundary, the edge of this circle doesn't matter so much. It just sort of helps me define where the ground is. I'll begin by toning the ground with a very, very light pressure on the stick. And because our light source is coming from above, I would expect my highlight to be somewhere in here on the circle, or on the sphere now, and my shadow is going to lay on the ground behind and below. Now on the sphere itself, I would expect the shadows to sort of creep in from around the edges, not the way that a folded edge works, but the way a rounded edge is going to behave. And so the gradations happen not so harshly, but they sort of flow around from the corners. I'm also going to be very careful to leave white paper up here on the sort of top of the sphere. So the outer edges will pick up a bit more of a dark shadow, and I'll work in towards a highlight to where my light source is. So in these two examples, kind of exercises in what we eventually will see in our observational drawings, we're paying very close attention to how light moves over a surface. Our very simplistic three-tone highlight, mid-tone, shadow of the box starts to break down a little bit in the sphere because these gradations happen gradually as the light travels around the corners, around the edges of a rounded object. This would be more like the way light travels around the edges of a cone or a cylinder. This is the way light may bend around corners of a complex polygon, rectangular solids, prisms, things like that. Do at least 2 of these exercises, one on a solid form and one in a curving form, to get accustomed to the way light travels over these surfaces. And after you've had this experience, we will take the step towards drawing objects from life.